Hi, welcome to the first unit on methods. So here we're going to talk about what are methods. We're going to introduce the def keyword. Def stands for define. The def keyword which is used to define a method, as well as the return keyword which is used to return a value. Okay, so let's start with what are methods. Now you can view, I'm stating here that you can view methods as a reusable functionality, some unit of reusable code. The keyword here is number one, it is a piece of function. Alright, it does something. Number two, it is reusable. So once you have written a method, it can be reused many times. Just treat it as a bunch of statements which you can use, okay, multiple times. So this method has got inputs and an output. So you can view a method as a system. Okay, I've drawn this diagram here. A method can be viewed as a system. Alright, and what happens in a system is the business of the person who is going to write the method, not the business of the person who is going to use the method. Alright, so we have two roles here, a person writing the method and a person using the method. To the person using the method is a black box. I don't care how it is written, I just want to use it. Right? So the method, being a system, takes in inputs. Right? And these inputs, you can have any number of inputs, 0 inputs, 1 input, 2 inputs, and so on. And it does something inside and it returns one value. There's one return value. Okay, so I mentioned here that methods can take in any number of parameters. The input items are the parameters, and it always returns one value, and it's up to the user of the method to use that value or not, to discard it, etc. Alright, now we're going to the second part here, how to use the def keyword and the return keywords. This is the syntax of about how to write a method. You use a def keyword. I mentioned just now that def probably stands for define, so you are using the def keyword to define a method. So you put a method name here, and optionally you can put any number of parameters. Now each parameter represents an input value. Okay, if there are no parameters, you can keep this empty. I forgot that you have to put round brackets here if there is at least one parameter. You need round brackets here. We see some examples, and then we have a bunch of statements in the method, any number of statements, at least one, otherwise it's very strange if you want to write a method which is empty. Okay, so you have any number of statements here. Your statements can include if, can include loops. You can do anything that can print stuff. You can perform calculations, anything. And the method is demarcated with the end keyword, the end of the method. You have the end keyword. Now remember, indent the statements in your method, 2 or 4 spaces, so that it's very easy for the reader to see where the method starts and where the method ends. Alright, I'll show some examples. Things are still a bit fuzzy here. Remember, a method is a unit of reusable functionality, reusable code. It takes in any number of input parameters, it does something inside, and returns one value to the user of this method. So the method provides a service, a functionality to the user of the method. Now, some examples. Okay, here is an example of a method. Very simple, very short method. The name of the method is called to Fahrenheit. To Fahrenheit. Now here, the method takes in one input parameter. I call it C. C is just a variable name. You can call it X, A, etc. But C is a good name because I'm expecting a value which is the Celsius value to be passed in as input to this method. Now what does it do in the method here? It performs some calculation. Number one, it converts whatever is passed in, which is stored in the variable C, it converts it to a float. Alright, could be an integer. I convert it to a float. And then that float value, I multiply it by 9, I divide it by 5, and add 32 to it. This is the formula to convert a Celsius value to a Fahrenheit value. Now there is a keyword here, return. Basically, this method returns this value. Well, another way to write this is f equals to this, and I return f. This works as well. This is a bit more long-winded. It works a bit amateurish because it's really unnecessary. Now what happens here is some mathematical calculation happens, and the answer is then assigned to f. F is a variable, of course. The next statement, I return the value stored in f to the person who uses this method called to Fahrenheit. Okay, this is an example of a method which takes in one input parameter. Let me show you another example. Okay, here is a method called get GST rate. And this method takes in nothing. So you may want to put brackets here, but in this case the brackets are optional. If it doesn't take in any input parameter, the round brackets are optional. You don't have to put the round brackets here. If you want, you can. And what happens when this method is executed? It simply returns 7%. End of story. It's a very simple method which takes in nothing but returns 0.07. Okay, now examine this method here. This method is called area of triangle. It takes in two input parameters. So remember, the person who writes this method needs to know how to calculate the area of a triangle given the breadth, the base, and the height. Okay, it's basically 0.5 times base times height. But the user of this method, someone who uses this functionality, does not have to know the formula. All he has to do is to know the name of the method and what it takes in. Okay, and call the method. In the next video, I'm going to show you how methods can be called. It's actually quite easy, but one step at a time. Be careful here, I'm using 0.5. If I do this, I'll be in trouble. Why? Remember integer division? 1 divided by 2 is 0. So if I write this method this way, this will always be 0. 0 times b is 0. That value times h is 0. So an amateurish and a beginner programmer might make this kind of mistake. This method will always return 0 regardless of the input parameters. Okay, so this is much safer. Alright, 0.5 or half times base times height. Okay, that's the end of this unit. The next unit we'll take a look at how to call a method.